From Washington, D.C., this is the Muslim News on Muslim Network TV. Assalamu alaikum, I'm Hena Zuberi. First, the headlines. 1 million Muslims start Hajj pilgrimage in Mecca. Dearborn makes history by adding Arabic to election materials. U.S. proposes regulations to improve student loan programs. Fire outside Long Island Mosque investigated as possible hate crime. 1.8 billion Muslims will offer Eid prayers this weekend. In our top story tonight, pilgrims gathered for dawn prayers and performed the initial rites of the Hajj on Thursday in Saudi Arabia's holy city of Mecca. It is the largest Hajj since the coronavirus pandemic upended the pilgrimage. This year's Hajj is still smaller than the one before the pandemic began. In 2019, about 2.5 million Muslims from around the world participated. In 2020 and 2021, the Saudi government allowed only locals under a number of restrictions to perform the pilgrimage due to the pandemic. Hajj is one of the 5 pillars of Islam. The Hajj is a once-in-a-lifetime duty for all Muslims physically and financially able to make the journey. Pilgrims spend several days tracing the path taken by Prophet Ibrahim, his wife Hajar, and their son Prophet Ismail, peace be upon them all. That includes praying around the cube-shaped Kaaba, the holiest shrine in Islam, re-established by Prophet Ibrahim. In the Quran, the Kaaba is described as the first house of worship ever built for humanity. On Wednesday, President Joe Biden said that the U.S. Department of Justice will take appropriate action if an investigation finds violations occurred in the police shooting of Jayland Walker. The 25-year-old unarmed black man was shot to death on June 27th in Akron, Ohio, after 8 police officers fired over 60 bullets into him. Biden was in Cleveland to address an audience about his economic agenda, but began his speech with the mention of Walker's murder. 3 peaceful protests against racism and police violence have been held locally so far in response to the killing. On Tuesday, Akron police released video footage showing the 8 officers killing Walker with the barrage of bullets. Law enforcement officials claim Walker was attempting to run from officers. A 2021 study by the medical journal The Lancet found that the highest rates of death from police violence occurred for Black Americans. They were estimated to be 3.5 times more likely to experience fatal police violence than white Americans. After years of campaigning, Dearborn, Michigan will finally provide voting ballots and other election material in Arabic. The city is home to the largest Arab American population in the United States, who make up over 40% of the city's population. Dearborn is also represented by the nation's first Palestinian Muslim Congresswoman, Rashida Tlaib. The Dearborn City Council voted unanimously in favor of providing election material in Arabic. Residents who wish to obtain Arabic translated absentee ballots for the midterm election next month must do so through the clerk's office or by mailing in a request form by July 18th. On Wednesday, the U.S. Department of Education introduced proposed regulations to improve student loan programs. U.S. Secretary of Education Miguel Cardona said student loan benefits should not be so hard to get. He said the proposed regulation will protect borrowers and save them time, money, and frustration, while holding colleges responsible for wrongdoing. If approved, the proposal will alleviate student loan debt burdens for some borrowers and public service workers who have met certain commitments. It would also stop interest capitalization that causes unpaid interest to be added to a borrower's principal balance. As well, it would give borrowers a court hearing to deal with disputes with their colleges. Muhammad Ammar and Ahmed Sowaidi have started a Muslim student association at Bennington College in Vermont. Ammar, a junior from Pakistan and one of the association leaders, said the group began forming last fall when the college had the largest incoming class in its history. He said Muslim students started building community by gathering for weekly Friday congregational prayers. The association was able to create a designated prayer space and room to prepare iftar during Ramadan for fasting students. The Muslim Student Association's goal not only is to represent Muslim students, but also to help the community freely, safely, and comfortably practice its faith on campus. Suffolk County Police are investigating a Monday night fire at a Long Island mosque as a possible hate crime. The Hate Crimes Unit and Arson Section detectives are probing the fire at the Fatima al-Zahra Mosque. A crescent sign was firebombed outside the mosque with something similar to a Molotov cocktail, said Police Commissioner Rodney Harrison. Surveillance videos show two people who witnesses say were men walking up a hill from their vehicle in the dark and lighting the symbol on fire. The sign was damaged, but the building was not affected. CAIR challenges program to promote atheism in Islamic countries. Details after the break. Stay tuned, and we'll be right back after these messages.
Sound Vision has a summer plan for your kids. Keep them busy and having fun. With creative teaching methods, songs, stories, art projects, and more. Amazing teachers and role models. Lessons that build love for Allah. Positive identity as a Muslim. Summer fun has just begun. Learn about animals in the Quran. Arabic vocabulary, beautiful names of Allah, science in the Quran, visit distant Muslim lands, learn fun facts about the country, the people, and how to cook special dishes, all from the safety and convenience of your home. Visit academy.adamsworld.org for more details. Hurry!
If I could be you, and you could be me for just 1 hour. If we could find a way to get inside each other's minds. Walk a mile in my shoes. Walk a mile in my shoes. Well, before you abuse, criticize, and accuse. Walk a mile in my shoes.
Mr. Speaker, if I decide to wear a turban, or you decide to wear a cross, or he decides to wear a kippah or a skull cap, or she decides to wear a hijab or a burqa, does that mean that it is open season for right honourable members of this House to make derogatory and divisive remarks about our appearance? For those of us who from a young age have had to endure and face up to being called names such as Towelhead or Taliban, or coming from Bongo land, we can appreciate full well the hurt and pain felt by already vulnerable Muslim women when they are described as looking like bank robbers and letterboxes. So rather than hide behind sham and whitewash investigations, when will the Prime Minister finally apologise for his derogatory and racist remarks? Racist remarks, Mr. Speaker, which have led to a spike in hate crime. And given the increasing prevalence of such incidents within his party, when will the Prime Minister finally order an inquiry into Islamophobia within the Conservative Party, something which he and his Chancellor promised on national television?
Despite the development of a COVID-19 vaccine, millions around the world will not have access. We need a vaccine that's free and available to everyone, everywhere. It's time for a people's vaccine.
To stop this genocide, we need your help.
The Council on American Islamic Relations last week expressed alarm about a U.S. State Department grant program that would promote atheism in Muslim-majority regions of Asia and the Middle East. According to the Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights and Labor, the program targets groups with projects supporting religious freedom globally. It aims to combat discrimination against atheists and ensure everyone enjoys the freedom to dissent from religious belief. The grant would be used to build and strengthen networks of advocates for the diverse communities of atheist, humanist, non-practicing, and non-affiliated people in targeted countries. Program activities will occur in 2 or 3 countries selected within South Central Asia or the Middle East and North Africa. On Monday, the UN Office of the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs said nearly 200 children in Somalia have died of malnutrition since January. The East African nation is witnessing catastrophic food insecurity for the first time since 2017. Drought conditions have deteriorated after an unprecedented 4th consecutive failed rainy season in 8 regions of the country. More than 7 million people are affected and over 800,000 people are displaced, according to the United Nations. The agency and its humanitarian partners have launched the Drought Response and Famine Prevention Plan through December. It requires $993 million to implement and target more than 6 million people, according to the United Nations. On Saturday, thousands of Afghan religious leaders pledged loyalty to the Taliban. Before the meeting, Taliban officials said criticism would be tolerated, and they could also discuss thorny issues such as girls' education. Last March, the Taliban banned secondary education for girls in the country, which was condemned by both local and international Islamic scholars and leaders. Media organizations were barred from the event, but the speeches were broadcast on state radio. The Taliban's reclusive supreme leader, Hibatullah Akhundzada, also made an appearance. 53-year-old Adam Muhammad has successfully walked from the UK to Mecca, Saudi Arabia, in 11 months. Muhammad is visiting the Holy Land to perform the Hajj pilgrimage this week. He's walked across 11 countries along the way. Muhammad set out to go to Mecca after a dream he had last August. He calls his walking experience a peace journey. A London-based charity helping Muslims facing Islamophobia say people are being bullied and harassed at work for their religion. The Islamophobia Response Unit says clients have had prayer mats stolen and they've been verbally and physically assaulted. The organization's CEO, Faiza Muqit, said that one man's colleagues physically pulled on his beard. They also referred to him as a Jafar, the main villain in the Disney film Aladdin. Muqit said a woman had bacon placed in her lunchbox by colleagues when she came to break her fast at work during Ramadan. Another woman had a heart attack due to being harassed at work, she said. In the last 4 years, the Islamophobia Response Unit has dealt with 387 cases of discrimination. Meanwhile, the British Prime Minister, who did not investigate Islamophobia in his Conservative Party, despite promising to do so, has resigned. 1.8 billion Muslims around the world, from South Africa to Alaska, will be offering Eid prayers this week. Muslims in America will be praying mostly in mosques around the country. However, in some cities, congregations reaching 30,000 people are expected to gather for Eid prayers in stadiums and other open spaces across the U.S. Muslims in China-controlled East Turkestan, which the Chinese government calls Xinjiang, will most likely not be allowed to pray. Muslims in Indian-held Kashmir and Palestinians living under Israeli occupation are likely to add, with their prayers, slogans for freedom. Coming up next after the break is our in-depth analysis segment, so stay tuned and we'll be right back after these messages.
If I could be you, and you could be me for just 1 hour. Walk a mile in my shoes. Walk a mile in my shoes.
Mr. Speaker, if I decide to wear a turban, or you decide to wear a cross, or he decides to wear a kippah or a skull cap, or she decides to wear a hijab or a burqa, does that mean that it is open season for right honourable members of this House to make derogatory and divisive remarks about our appearance? For those of us who from a young age have had to endure and face up to being called names such as Towelhead or Taliban, or coming from Bongo land, we can appreciate full well the hurt and pain felt by already vulnerable Muslim women when they are described as looking like bank robbers and letterboxes. So rather than hide behind sham and whitewash investigations, when will the Prime Minister finally apologise for his derogatory and racist remarks, which... Racist remarks, Mr. Speaker, which have led to a spike in hate crime. And given the increasing prevalence of such incidents within his party, when will the Prime Minister finally order an inquiry into Islamophobia within the Conservative Party, something which he and his Chancellor promised on national television?
Despite the development of a COVID-19 vaccine, millions around the world will not have access. We need a vaccine that's free and available to everyone, everywhere. It's time for a people's vaccine.
Dad, they took over my bedroom. Come on, come on. Okay, Dad. 1, 2, 3. Dad! You saved me. Dad?
Are you okay?
I'm fine, dear.
Your hero needs you now, and AARP is here to help. Find the care guides you need at aarp.org/caregiving.
We are Justice for All. Headquartered in the heart of downtown Chicago, Justice for All is a global humanitarian initiative dedicated to raising awareness for human rights concerns impacting vulnerable minority groups. Our diverse team of staff and volunteers, led by Imam Malik Mujahid, work tirelessly to help Justice for All achieve their goals. We promote policies that protect religious freedom, address the root causes of mass displacement, and recognize the plight of refugees and forced migrants. Together, we can continue to stand up for justice. Justice for all.
Welcome back. We'll go now to Imam Abdul Malik Mujahid for our in-depth analysis. Over to you, Imam.
Thank you, Hena. The influence of Christian extremism, or Christian nationalism rather, is rising at home in America as well as abroad. And it is coming into news. Is it really rising, or is it more in the news? To discuss all of that with us is Professor Andrew Whitehead.
I'm glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
Professor Whitehead is Associate Professor at IUPUI and Co-Director of Association of Religion Data Archives. Now, so tell us, is it really Christian nationalism is really rising, or is more in the news?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think mostly what we're seeing is a greater attention paid to Christian nationalism in the news. When we survey Americans across the U.S., over the last 10 to 15 years, we don't see a rise in the number of Americans that are embracing Christian nationalism. Those numbers are mostly holding steady or declining somewhat for those that strongly embrace Christian nationalism. But overall, we do see politicians, religious leaders, and everyday Americans, it seems to be more comfortable embracing this ideology and espousing it as they make their case for how they think America should look. And so in many ways, I think Christian nationalism is more in the news and getting more attention paid to it rather than growing around the American public.
So if it is not showing up in public opinion survey, then how it is being measured? I mean, the same groups becoming more powerful? Are they being better funded? Why it is coming into the news?
Yeah, I think it's a number of those reasons that you list. It's been a force in American politics for decades. And so we know that it's really powerful in encouraging Americans to vote a particular way. So when a politician espouses the rhetoric of Christian nationalism, advocating for a close fusion of a particular type of Christianity with American national identity, there are a number of Americans that respond to that and want to support politicians that do that. And so with the Trump administration and even since, we've seen politicians lean into this rhetoric more and more to try and draw these Americans to the voting booths and support them. And so as this group maybe isn't growing, their identity as Americans who identify as Christians and want to see their particular type of Christianity privileged in the public sphere is becoming more salient to them. And so that's why we see it growing in the news and people saying that, yeah, I want to see America be a Christian nation, because they feel as though that is under attack. Whether it is or not, they feel that way. And so this is becoming, I think, more of a ideology that people latch onto.
What is Christian nationalism?
So Christian nationalism is a cultural framework. And cultural frameworks, we can think about those as ideologies, narratives, stories we tell about ourselves that tell us who we are, what we're all about, and where we're going. And so this cultural framework of Christian nationalism is focused on trying to make a particular expression of Christianity privileged in the public sphere, to see it closely fused with American civic identity, national identity, see our public policies align with it. And so when I say a particular type of Christianity, it isn't all Christians that ascribe to this particular vision and viewpoint. But a small number of Americans, around 20% or so, strongly embrace Christian nationalism. And they want to see a very politically and religiously conservative brand of Christianity privileged in the public sphere. And so that is what makes it so powerful. And most times this means that they want to see their vision for society privileged, which means they're in control, they're in positions of power, and they're able to really affect the social policies that influence the lives of all Americans.
So how Christian is Christian nationalism, considering that there might be overlap with neo-Nazis and white nationalism? Or is it the name of the same thing?
That's a really great question. So Christians of all different stripes do ascribe to Christian nationalism. So it isn't as though Christian nationalism and those that embrace it aren't Christians or real Christians. Many American Christians who attend church regularly, they do ascribe to this view to varying degrees. And Christian nationalism does overlap somewhat with different groups that we think of with white supremacy and far-right extremist groups. But they aren't one and the same. And so you'll have Americans who believe that the U.S. should be distinctively Christian. We should see, again, their view of a Christian society. They want to see that come to pass. And we find that those that embrace white supremacist views or far-right political views sometimes use the same rhetoric of defending Western civilization or, wanting to see a Christian nation. But for them, it's much more of this idea of white people generally being in positions of power and this country serving them. And so that's where we see some overlap. But again, they aren't one and the same. And Christian nationalism is much more of a spectrum and is much more broadly embraced by a number of Americans than we would see if we tried to measure far-right extremist views.
So Christian nationalists, how deeply they believe in democracy and democratic institutions. Is Christianity more important to them or democracy?
That's a really great question. And what we're finding in national surveys is that those Americans that strongly embrace Christian nationalism are less and less committed to a liberal, pluralistic, democratic society where all Americans and all citizens have an equal right to positions of power or a say in what this country should look like. So that means that racial and ethnic minorities, they would tend to limit their access to the democratic process. Religious minorities, they would tend to limit access to the democratic process because more and more we find that Americans that strongly embrace Christian nationalism, they believe democracy and access to democracy should be for the right type of American. And in their view, that means generally a white, natural-born, Christian, culturally or religiously citizen. And so if you don't meet those different identities, they tend to want to limit access to the democratic process. So by and large, if they feel as though they aren't able to maintain access to positions of power through the democratic process, they're more and more willing to set those norms of democracy aside to ensure that they maintain their privileged position in American society. And some of that we saw on January 6th at the insurrection.
So do you think January 6th attack on the Capitol Hill has an element of Christian nationalist?
Yes, I do, definitely. What we saw that day were the Christian flag being waved, Jesus Save signs, people holding Bibles or having T-shirts with Christian scriptures written on them. Even the videos that the insurrectionists posted on social media talked about how they viewed their actions as taking this country back, this country that God had given them, that they believed the Christian God designed for them. And so even in their own words, we see that a part of their motivation was Christian nationalism, this belief that this country was given to them by the Christian God and that they need to do what they can to take it back to ensure that how this country operates aligns with, again, their vision for the country, which they legitimate in Christianity or the Christian scriptures or what religious or political leaders are telling them. And so while Christian nationalism isn't the only explanation for January 6th at the insurrection, it is a really key part of it. And we have to understand it because it really does make fertile ground for extremism and violence like we saw on January 6th.
Would you say that Steve Bannon is a Christian nationalist?
It's really difficult for us to highlight or to be able to say if a certain person is or isn't embracing Christian nationalism because we use a number of questions in our surveys and then put those together. And so unless a person answers those questions, I can't say for sure. But in looking at what Steve Bannon has said or written in the past, we do find elements where he realizes the power of this idea of defending this Christian nation, this Christian society, and using that language to motivate Americans to support a particular candidate or to oppose a particular candidate. And so while he may or may not be someone who embraces Christian nationalism, we do see in the words that he says and the words that he writes, that he recognizes the power of Christian nationalism and that rhetoric to motivate people and to try and bring them into a coalition that has power at the voting booth.
Professor Whitehead, one question I wonder about is the presence of Indian Americans or Indians with Indian flag in January 6th. At the same time, the Norway killer of 77 people, he has devoted 102 pages to Hindu nationalists, appreciating them and all of that. So what is common between Christian nationalists and the Hindu nationalists?
That's a really great question. And I think there are a lot of commonalities when we look at Christian nationalism in the United States and perhaps Hindu nationalism in India or other religious nationalisms in other countries. And I think the common thread there is this idea of religious nationalism, where it might take on a different religion based on the country that it exists in and that history and how that culture and religion overlapped. But some common threads are there where essentially people are using that religion to legitimate a very particular view for their society and who should be in control and who should have power. And so when we look at Hindu nationalism in India, which I'm not an expert in, but we compare it to Christian nationalism here in the United States, and we look at when Trump was in the Oval Office and the leader of India came and they had a rally in Houston, you could see that there was a mutual admiration almost for using religious nationalism to prop up this person in power and to legitimate their view for society for their country. And so that, I think, is what's key, where we see people in positions of power using religion to say, well, this is what God wants, and this is how society should look, and these are the people that should be in power. So those are the common elements I think we can see across countries with religious nationalism and the power that it holds within those countries.
Is this the reason that you find among Christian nationalists and definitely among Hindu nationalists high appreciation of Hitler and Nazis?
Yeah, so I'm not sure, and I don't have data to know whether Americans that embrace Christian nationalism, their overall views towards Hitler or the Nazis. But we do see common threads with demagogues or those that are in power using religion to, again, prop up what they see as their view. So Hitler said and talked about Christianity and Germany being a Christian nation. And we see other folks doing that as well. And so the common thread there is for those that want to legitimate a very particular view for society in the sacred, that can be very powerful. And that's something that has happened for centuries and across many different countries. And so we'll continue to see that into the future with those folks that want to hold on to power and ensure that their vision for society comes to pass. Christian nationalism or other types of religious nationalisms will still be a very powerful tool in their toolkit.
Well, thank you so much, Professor Whitehead, for your time and your thoughts.
Yes, thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. Back to you, Hena.
That's all from our Washington studios tonight. Thank you for tuning in. You can find previous episodes and more on our YouTube or Facebook. For more content, keep watching Muslim Network TV or visit muslimnetwork.tv. Assalamu alaikum, good night, and Eid Mubarak.